Hey, if you've ever walked past those beautiful old row houses on Capitol Hill and wondered what's inside, here's your chance. The Capitol Hill Restoration Society's House and Garden Tour is back on May 9th and 10th. 8 private homes, 3 semi-public buildings, and a native plant garden, all in the older part of the neighborhood, with this year's home base right on Barracks Row. We're talking grand Victorian brick, old frame houses, stucco buildings, all the beautiful architecture that we love to nerd out about here on CityCast. Tickets are $40 in advance, $50 at the door, and $30 if you're a CHRS member. Snag yours on Eventbrite now. Today on CityCast DC, we're talking about the state of the DC election campaign, who's up, who's down, and whether ranked choice voting is going to confound everyone. We're talking about the stats and politics of crime, and we're talking about the worst possible take, there is one, on the White House Correspondents' Dinner gunman incident. And in a members-only fourth segment, the dastardly scheme, or possibly the ingenious scheme, to return Arlington and Alexandria to the district. I'm here with CityCast's Emma Uber and the 51st's Martin Austermuhle. Today is Friday, May 1st. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Emma.
Good morning.
Hey, Martin.
Hello.
Listen, before we get into today's show, the episode is sponsored by NACE Law Group, the people you should call if you or someone in your family has been hurt. They are a longtime supporter of CityCast because just like us, they care about this community and the people who call it home. Thank you to NACE Law Group. We have a thing in our newsletter today about embassy days this weekend. Martin, you used to work at embassies, right?
I did. I worked for 2 different embassies, and I only chose conflictive countries. I worked for the Venezuelans and the Afghans.
So there is a day called Embassy Days where a lot of them open their doors. People can come in. You can, look at what their paperwork is like compared to our paperwork. And I got to thinking how, it's weird. There's this enormous population of people who work in embassies and the World Bank and stuff who often just sort of live lives that are untied to the lives of people who live here. And this is kind of a cool day to get in that world. Emma, where would you go if you could pick one foreign embassy?
I don't know. I've heard good things about the French embassy. I want to check them out, but it's tough because it conflicts with Porch Fest this year too. They're on the same day.
Well, fear not, actually, because the EU countries have a different embassy day. It's a week later.
Okay, see, you're exposing me. I've been really trying to focus on what bands I'm going to check out at Admo Porch Fest this weekend, and I haven't planned my embassy itinerary yet.
Unfortunately, all the ones I'm super curious about, like Russia, right? Where's all the spy equipment? There was all that all those stories in the Cold War about they had massive amounts of stuff and your radio signals would go all screwy when you drove past. I never experienced that, but people claimed it was true. But they are not participating. So I'm just going to have to visit Azerbaijan or something. Hey, let's talk about the elections, which are fast approaching. There was a mayoral debate on Wednesday night. There's also, Martin, you wrote, I thought, something really interesting about going to the debate up in Ward 3 between the various aspirants for this open at-large DC council seat. Can you just, for the people who are only just now tuning in, give us a sense of, where the various races are at in terms of, both the people who are leading it, but also what are the sort of major issues dividing people and that the candidates at least think are the most important to us because they're talking about them all the time?
So, well, for anybody who is only now tuning in, you're not alone. I feel like most DC residents are now starting to pay attention, both because there have been some recent mini scandals, but also, we're a month and a half out. This is when I think people are really starting to take notice that an election is coming up. Obviously, the big marquee contest is the mayoral election. There hasn't been, and this kind of tells you how close things might be, there hasn't really been any good polling, even from the campaigns. They're not letting loose on the polling that they may have done to show where they might be. So, but Kenyon McDuffie and Janice Louis-George assumed frontrunners. There's been a significant uptick in debates recently. There was a debate this week that was hosted by the city. There's another debate. Well, there's multiple mayoral debates this week, actually. There's going to be multiple ones next week. So And they're all sharpening their attacks a lot more than they had in the past. I think Kenyon McDuffie and Janice Louis-George have found attack lines, and they're delivering them with increasing frequency. And they're also finding other ways to attack each other. There's allegations of campaign finance improprieties and the such. So that's the state of that race. I think the at-large race for the DC Council is also interesting because that's 9 candidates, 9 Democrats. And again, same sort of thing. I don't think anybody can handicap that race necessarily because A, there's so many candidates, B, so many of them are unknowns. I think most of them are, in fact. But there's a range of people on there. You have people who used to work on the council. You have a former pharmacist. You have a guy who used to be the chair of the Board of Zoning Adjustment. So you have like all sorts of different characters talking about all sorts of different issues. And then you have different races on the ward level. You have the Ward 1 race, which is kind of the most dynamic and interesting. And then you have races that just never happen. Like there's no one challenging the current council chairman who's been in office for 30 some odd years. And he's running unopposed. It's wild that it's the second most powerful position in government and no one decided that they wanted to challenge him. So that's the rough state of affairs.
Do you have a sense of, like, insofar as you can paint with a broad brush, what are the kinds of issues that divide people? I know we've got in the mayoral race a lot of attention to one of the candidates, Janice Louis-George. She is very progressive. She's a member of Democratic Socialists of America. Her main rival, Kenyon McDuffie, is thought of as a more centrist figure. He gets a lot of money from vested interests and talks much more middle of the road kinds of ideas. Is that same dynamic extend to the other races in DC?
I think it's fair to say it does. And yeah, you're right. I think everybody recognizes that DC is in a very difficult place right now. Economically, its relations with the Trump administration. Where candidates are differing is how to address those things. You got Janice Louis-George, which is much more, her vibe is much more, we need to be unabashedly progressive and ambitious. So I'm going to throw out really big promises that could cost a lot of money and may require tax increases, but that's what the moment calls for. And then the Kenyon McDuffies of the world and that ilk are much more, I wouldn't say conservative, but they're like the one thing DC has to do now more than anything else is attract businesses. It's lost a ton of federal government jobs, so they have to make sure they're attracting other employers to come to the city. Because without that employment, you have no tax revenue. Without tax revenue, you don't have all the programs that progressives love. So that's obviously most prominent at the mayoral level. I think at the at-large level, it also is because that's a citywide seat, so they're talking about citywide issues. At the ward levels, it's kind of filtered down too, because the leading candidate, one of the leading candidates in the Ward 1 race is also a DSA, a Democratic Socialist member and also endorsed candidate. And I think she's also taking a very ambitious approach to things. She's promising universal free childcare, which is also one of those things you're like, okay, you'll be a single council member on a council of 13 people. Plus, you haven't spelled out how you're going to pay for this amidst all the other budget challenges. So, yeah, I think the dynamic is kind of playing out from the top down.
Yeah, and one interesting thing about that Ward 1 race is DC's seen its first kind of cross endorsement between candidates because this is the first election where we have ranked choice voting. Are you getting a sense of how candidates and voters alike are feeling about that? Do you think voters kind of understand how that's going to work, or do you think it's going to be a little bit of a mess? What's the sense you're getting there?
I feel like every time DC makes any changes to its elections, it is a bit of a mess. I remember back in the day, even if they'd move a precinct location because, let's say, it used to be at a church, but the church is undergoing renovation, so they have to move it for an election cycle. They would literally tell everybody 20 times, and people would still show up the day of the election and be like, why is my precinct closed? So again, it's tough to tell people that things are changing because a lot of times they just don't hear that they're changing. So ranked choice voting, I've gotten the sense that I was out at some of the kind of education events that the Board of Elections has put on, and people seem to understand the basics of ranking once it's explained. What is really hard to understand is how the voting rounds go, like how you're actually counting the votes and how people are getting eliminated and how those votes get reapportioned. But I think the ranking is being understood. Now, again, and education is ramping up. Now campaigns are talking about it. You talked about this cross endorsement between 2 Ward 1 candidates. That's a really good mechanism to teach people how this works. Like you can vote, you can rank your best candidate number 1, but there's a number 2 through 5. Like you have options, and this is why you should use them. So I get the vibe that I don't think it's going to be as big a disaster as the opponents claimed it was. Like there's not going to be, the election will not come undone. Now, I think there will be people who are going to walk into polling places on election day and look at their ballots and be like, I have no clue what this is.
Right. And the logic of ranked choice voting, I mean, there was 2 logics, I guess. One is that you have these races in D.C., like the at-large race you're just talking about, where there's like 9 candidates in a Democratic primary, and a lot of people haven't heard of any of them. And it's possible that someone will win with like 14% of the vote. And that's not good. So if you can pick your second choice and your third choice and your fourth choice, et cetera, the person who winds up winning will have some claim to like a much broader bunch of support. And the other thing is if you've got a bunch of like, say, 4 progressives and 1 more conservative person, even if like 70% of the people vote for a progressive, the conservative person could win. And I guess it's also supposed to encourage people to be nicer to each other because, like, if if you and me and Emma are in a race, Martin, and I'm ripping you constantly, people who like you are liable to rank Emma ahead of me. And so it's supposed to make us more civil. The cross endorsement that Emma just mentioned, super interesting. Do you see other ways that this dynamic is playing, either in the kind of like positions candidates are taking or in their tactics out there?
Well, first of all, I think you should anybody listening should rank me first and Emma second. Obviously, don't rank Mike. It's just not worth it.
My supporters aren't going to like you hearing you say that. I'm just saying.
So it's interesting you say about this dynamic, and it's true. That's the logic, is that it's supposed to be people are going to be nicer because there's still votes out there, even if you're not ranked first. To be honest, on the mayoral level, that has not played out. Like, they are still going at each other pretty aggressively. They've also both said, or indirectly said, that they're not messaging to their opponent, to their voters, like, rank me first, but here's someone else you can rank second. They have not said that. And actually, Janice Louis-George's spokeswoman put on Instagram the other day that she's only going to vote for Janice. So she's going to give up the other 4 votes that she has. So she's literally bullet voting, which you can do. You can just vote for one. But it also means that if Janice doesn't win in the first round, her own spokespersons won't have any votes for the second round and third round, which, okay, I mean, that's a personal choice. But I think in some of the ward races and some of the, like, I guess, non-front runner candidates in the mayoral race are starting to say, listen, if you don't rank me first, rank me second. Gary Goodweather, who's one of the mayoral candidates, who's been in for a while, he's been messaging a lot like, look, I assume I won't be getting all the first rankings, but look, I'm here, give me your second ranking. So will it work for victory? I have no idea, but it's interesting to see him try.
There's one more question. I haven't, you have done some reporting on this. The nightmare scenario for me is it is like the day after the election and they're still tabulating the stuff, because they have to wait until every mail-in ballot arrives. And, it's baffling because the advertisement, like in France, there's a runoff like a week after the regular election. So everyone, it's a Sunday and then no one has 50%. There's an election the next week and everyone knows how that works. But the promise of ranked choice voting was the computer will just tabulate these ballots and spit out the winner, and we won't have to go through that. But that's not what happened in other places where they rolled it out. So the nightmare scenario is it's like after the election, no one knows who's won. People in our low trust society are suspicious. They think someone's monkeying around with the ballot. Stephen Miller is out there saying, like, these people can't even run an election. Why should they have home rule? The elections board has already said, like, no, we're not going to have this stuff right away. So they've already acknowledged that they're not going to be able to do that. Are the campaigns, or for that matter, the city government, doing any thinking about the sort of nightmare scenario, how they will defend, like how they will convince people that this election does have integrity and how they will fend off like whatever sort of bad faith attacks they get from the Hill or from the Trump administration or anyone else?
Yeah, the director of the Board of Elections was talking. She went to a breakfast with the council about 2 weeks ago, and she talked through this. And she admitted, she's like, we may not have elections final-ish results until about 3 days after the election, because they're going to get once polls close, they'll have all the votes from that day, so the in-person votes and any mail ballots that have come in through that point. They'll essentially just announce these are all the votes, the first rankings that each candidate got. That's all you'll see. So like, okay, Janice Louis-George has 40% of the first rankings, and then like Kenya McDuffie has 36%, but you'll know nothing after that. And they won't start running those second and third and fourth rounds until they have what they say is a majority of ballots in, which they say could take up to the third day after the election. So they recognize that could create this space for people to like, claim fraud or do whatever else. So they say they're working with a pretty well-known California-based consultancy on language, on like how to message this and how to. Now the issue is like you could come up with the best language ever. The issue is getting it to people, and I think the Board of Elections doesn't do the greatest job of getting stuff out to people. I mean, they send mailers, but how often do those mailers get lost in the rest of your mail? Often, right?
I think if we're doing this, man, we gotta just make an earlier deadline for mail-in ballots?
Yeah, because right now it's 10 days for your ballot to get into the Board of Elections if it's postmarked on Election Day.
You got to have the postmark 10 days before the election or something. Which is too bad for mail-in balloters, but it just seems like the danger here is so huge.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my hashtag ready. My steal, what is it, like Stop the Steal DC
Stop the
hashtag.
steal.
It's ready to go on Election Day.
Life can change faster than DC seasons. One moment, everything feels normal, and next, your world is turned upside down. So don't let someone else's mistake ruin your spring. Call the team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful death, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers. They dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here is something that I love. They are a longtime supporter of CityCast because just like us, they really care about this community and the folks who call it home. So if you or someone that you care about has been hurt, don't wait. Call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected so that you can focus on what matters most.
Hi, CityCast CEO David Plotz here. Are you looking for something a little different to do just outside DC this May? Live Golf is back, May 7th through 10th at Trump National Golf Club along the Potomac. And Live is not your typical golf weekend. I really love golf, love it. But usually golf tournaments are expensive and you cannot bring your kids unless you really want to be miserable. But not Live Golf. Think festival atmosphere, food, drinks, interactive fan experiences, golf challenges, and world-class golf. Bryson DeChambeau, Dustin Johnson, and a stacked international field. And honestly, you don't have to be a golf person to have a great time out there. Tickets start at just $26. Kids 12 and under get in free with a ticketed adult. And Saturday night, Bailey Zimmerman closes it out in concert. It's a really easy day trip, a solid weekend plan, and something genuinely fun to do before summer kicks in. Get your tickets now at livegolf.com. That's LIV golf.com.
So, Emma, we've worked together like a month now?
Yeah, about a month.
So why did you come to CityCast?
Yeah, I came to CityCast after I, like hundreds of other journalists, sadly were laid off by the Washington Post. And I just really wanted to find a newsroom that would allow me to keep reporting on DC, and then I felt like was really investing in local news. And I was so excited when I found CityCast. I feel like I was able to find a place that is really pouring time, money, resources, talent into covering, DC, Washingtonians, and the stories that impact all of us here in the district.
And if I recall correctly, at first I asked you if you wanted to volunteer and work here for free, and you were like, no, that's not possible, right?
Absolutely.
Which means we got to pay Emma. And you, the listener who could become a member, can help us do that. News gathering, as we all know, is expensive. It's cumbersome. There's, for every awesome scoop Emma's going to get, there's days of like digging a dry hole. And, it's too expensive for Jeff Bezos. It's expensive. So we're in our membership campaign, and I really hope that you will sign up, both to support the work and because Emma's going to do amazing work here, and a lot of it you might not be able to see if you don't join.
Well, thank you. Yes, so it's $10 a month or $100 for a year, and you can sign up at membership.citycast.fm if you want to support the work we're doing over here.
We have a little alert on our office Slack when someone new signs up, and it's like dinging like crazy these days. I'd like to attribute this all to Emma being part of the mix and her fans coming in and people seeing this is some serious stuff. But I really hope it dings with the names of anyone who's listening right now.
Me too. It's always I don't know if it's all me, but it's always a mood booster throughout the day and exciting to know that more people are going to get to hear our amazing reporting. So again, that's membership.citycast.fm.
And it's also good to know that all of those names who ding in our Slack and sign up and visit membership.citycast.fm are getting to walk around with very cool CityCast totes and tell the world where Emma works.
It's true. It's true. I just got my tote in the mail, and I'm very excited to put
Which one did you pick?
the local news one. I'm very excited to promote local news while I'm carrying my groceries back home.
Well, I hope you all will join too and do the same thing. It also carries a lot of groceries too, so enjoy. Okay, speaking of stealing, crime in DC is down except for weapon assaults.
Yes.
And, you know, we've been through a week of just a lot of like news, 2 weeks in a row with like news about minors being shot, not killed happily, but you know, pretty awful things that make you feel not so confident just going about doing normal stuff in your city. Why is this happening?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think April has felt especially brutal in DC because the first 3 months of the year were so remarkably nonviolent. I mean, it was the longest time in decades that DC went in a year without a homicide. There were only like 12 homicides in the first 3 months of the year, and there were 14 in April alone, which is on par with what we saw last year, actually a little bit less than what we saw in 2024 and the same number we saw in 2023. But I think it just feels so brutal this year because we'd had such a period of peace. And as you said, it's involved a lot of teens and young people. I'm thinking particularly of the case where 2 teen boys were shot getting food at a food truck. Like there have been particularly gruesome killings. And I think that the perception is that things are getting really bad. It's definitely worth noting that, according to DC police crime stats, homicides are still down 46% compared to this time last year. And last year was one of the district's most nonviolent years in decades. But you're right, assaults with a deadly weapon or a dangerous weapon are up 35%, which is pretty substantial. I mean, some crime stats experts say that that's one of the stats that can kind of fluctuate in small ways based on how police are charging crimes or categorizing crimes, because a dangerous weapon can be a knife or a gun, or it could be a car or a bottle or anything used as a weapon. However, 35% is a high enough increase to show that clearly there is some sort of increased violence going on.
Emma, the other thing, speaking of stats, and I mean, it's pretty hard to fake homicide stats. You know, someone either died or did not die. But there is this ongoing controversy, which has gathered some heat this week about whether the MPD systematically downplayed crime stats in ways that made it appear that the stats were better than they were. This is a claim of some members of the police union. There's been a lot of anger about this. It's been jumped on by Republicans on the Hill. You know, I think there may be their own agenda of trying to, quote unquote, prove that Trump and Trump alone lowered crime here. But that's some ugly stuff. And I think for any of us who've worked in like organizations of any size, like when people put a happy smile on things, it's usually for like much less nefarious reasons. It's usually because like they don't want to be in trouble with their boss or something, rather than because they're trying to fool the vast public. But that's like, where does that stand? What's going to happen if like this report that the Republicans say is done actually does show that this was happening?
I think that it will cause a big uproar. It's tricky because crime stat manipulation has been kind of a rumored complaint for years in the police department, as you say, that has been seized on by the Trump administration in recent months. And I talked to a lot of different people that are crime stat experts to try to get to the bottom of it. And as they said, there's kind of 2 ways that it can happen. There's this like coordinated conspiracy, or there's this way where people are less nefariously downgrading crimes because they don't want to get in trouble with their boss. And the DOJ report that came out earlier this year basically said that there was a toxic culture in which people were afraid of being berated, so they would minimize crime. However, it notably stopped short of accusing anyone of directing anyone to lower crime stats. And so now there was a letter released earlier this week. The House Oversight Committee has received word that the internal investigation within DC Police has just wrapped up, and they have given DC Police until May 12th to hand over that report. So the bombshell here would be if DC Police found evidence of someone directly instructing a subordinate to manipulate crime stats, because the allegation right now is that maybe there was some miscategorization going on. That's a problem. It was the indirect result of a toxic culture. But if that MPD report ended up tracing it back to a specific directive, that would be kind of the smoking gun, per se, that the Trump administration may have been looking for.
I've got sort of two questions on this, one in each of your guys' wheelhouse. Emma, okay, we take away the politics and the policy implications and stuff. When you hear a lot about people getting jumped or shot or whatever, and either in your neighborhood or in your city, that tends to make you, the individual, feel like themselves less safe, more anxious about things, maybe less trusting of your fellow human. We're in a moment when, we're in a week or 2 week period where there's been a lot of that, after a few month period where there's been not that much of that, and after a few year period where there was more of it than we were used to. Do you have a sense, or the police, the law enforcement, the experts you talk to have a sense of should we feel unsafe in our city? Should we feel more it's? I realize it's very hard to instruct people about how they should feel, but you as a person who's been a police reporter, who's watched this stuff, when you see a spate of stories like that, what does it do to your actual personal feelings about I'm going to run out to the store now?
Right. There's two different things here, because statistically, especially this year, we should be feeling safe in DC. If you look at the stats, it has been, again, a remarkably nonviolent year. These past couple weeks have had a lot of tragedy, but as far as DC public safety overall goes, there have been remarkably few homicides. However, I think something that you always need to be sensitive to when you're reporting on crime is safety is a deeply personal feeling. And I think people are feeling very spooked right now. I think that things were quiet on the homicide front, but we've been hearing so much rhetoric around DC policing and DC public safety. We know historically that summers are more violent in DC, especially for young people. Teen takeovers have been this kind of tension point in which some people are scared that some terrible mass shooting is going to happen at these takeovers. Some people are scared that police brutality is going to happen at these takeovers. I think people are just starting to get to a point where they're very on edge. And I mean, there's no way for me to predict this, but I was saying, back in 2023, there were 14 homicides in April. This year, there were 14 homicides in April. And then in 2023, May was the month where the homicide rate just kicked up to horrific levels. So that doesn't necessarily mean that will happen this year. It seems trends indicate that it will not. But I was talking to someone the other week, and they were like, I just am getting this really terrible feeling about this summer. And I think that DC residents are a little bit on edge to see if this will be an outlier this month or if this is the start of a really concerning trend as weather starts to get warmer.
And Martin, as we've been discussing, we're in the middle of an election season. There was last week when two teenage boys were shot while getting food. Janice Lewis George, who's one of the leading mayoral candidates, she's somebody who had been very vocal about defunding the police in the days around 2020. She sort of changed that tune, but not really explained the evolution. She was beat up on for putting out a social media post about this shooting that was didn't really say anything about finding who did it and bringing them to justice, or didn't say enough. That was obviously the people seizing on this were people who didn't like her anyway. So without litigating one social media post, I will note that this week, when there was another shooting that hit a kid, the second in her thread said we need to hold whoever did it responsible. DC's been a place where the politics of crime have been kind of all over the place, but how much is this a factor in the mayoral campaigns, and what are the various people saying?
I don't think it wasn't much of a factor up until this point. I think if you were back in 22, 23, 24, absolutely public safety was top of mind. Now, in the last couple of weeks, it was barely brought up. And just this week, in one of the big televised debates between Janice Lewis George and Kenya McDuffie probably said a half a dozen times that Janice Lewis George had voted or wanted to divest from MPD, wanted to defund MPD. He sees that as a line of attack that is going to resonate now that people are seeing the news about these, especially kids. I mean, some of these, and the one of the cases this week was a 5-year-old who was hit. wasn't killed, but was hit in a shooting. So I think he sees that as a very good line of attack. And even the Democratic Socialists, they have these questionnaires that they send out to candidates for endorsements ahead of time. And almost all the candidates, and there's questions about public safety. And one of the questions, I think, was something like, what's a vulnerability? Or like, what would you do about public safety? Or something just basic like that. And almost every candidate running for office as a Democratic Socialist or looking for the endorsement admitted that one of their biggest Achilles, like their Achilles heel, is public safety. Because people see them, associate them with defund the police. Like that's a connection that people seem to make. Janice Louis-George talked a lot about not just enforcement, but also prevention and intervention, not just using police, but using crisis behavioral specialists, like that sort of stuff. Like
you can say the words, Martin, violence interrupters.
Violence interrupters. But I mean, that being said, her platform does call for hiring more police, which is a pretty big change. Now,
does she explain that evolution?
No, that is actually a question I have for the next time I run into her, because I mean, there is the tweet that the police union will put out there on almost a daily basis at this point.
They tweeted it this morning.
Yeah, where she says like we should divest from MPD and put money into like, other things, into social programs or whatever else. It's a good question. Like, how did that evolution happen? Other thing I wanted to mention, which I only recently learned, which is kind of shocking too, was that even as homicides have gone down in DC, the proportion of homicides that have happened has increased in domestic cases. So like more homicides are now domestic related. And some folks from the city gave the council a presentation on this about a week ago. And they said that last year, 22% of homicides were domestic related. This year, we're at 25%. So like, it's good overall that you have fewer people being killed, but now you're seeing the people who are being killed, it's an intimate violence. It's like people who, like, they're being killed by people they know. The mayor and Janine Pirro and stuff have now introduced new legislation. They're taking action on this because they see that as something that is like, oh, now it's really obvious. I mean, not that it wasn't obvious before, but in 23, when you have hundreds of homicides, it's easy to conceal the domestics. Now it's much harder.
If you're not using Today Ticks to plan your next night out, what are you waiting for? Today Ticks has deals on all the hottest events at your favorite venues in the DMV, like Arena Stage, Signature Theater, Shakespeare Theater Company, and more. All tickets are verified, and with exclusive discounts on last-minute rush tickets, you'll find deals you can't get anywhere else. Plus, you'll earn rewards like ticket protection and Tix Cash just for using the app. You can even set an alert for events that aren't available yet, so you're ready to book tickets to the best events, like Pippin at the Signature Theater or Othello at the Shakespeare Theater Company the second they go live. Visit todaytix.com/CityCastDC or download the app to impress all of your friends by being the first to know about what's happening in your city. Hey, Bridget Todd here, one of the hosts of CityCast DC. We're in the middle of our spring membership campaign where we ask you, our listeners, to support this show and the newsroom that we're building in this city by becoming a CityCast DC neighbor. Trust me when I say that being a neighbor comes with great perks like ad-free listening, weekly bonus content just for members, and invites to exclusive events. So all that stuff is great, but even more than that, member support is the financial fuel that we need to keep showing up for our city. And here's a little taste of why your actual neighbors support this show. Matt H. says, reliable local journalism is essential for developing community and holding people in power accountable. Matt, that is the truth. Jake H. says, I love the local approach to journalism and understanding that news in this city is more than just what happens between the Hill and the White House. You said it, Jake H. And Katie K says, I'm a small business owner in DC who wants to support other local initiatives, and CityCast is one of the best ways to stay plugged into what's going on in my city. Thank you, Katie K. So to join these fine folks in becoming a CityCast DC neighbor, head to membership.citycast.fm/CityCastDC. It's only $10 a month or $100 for the year. And if you join this week, you get a super cute tote. I have it. I love it. I can confirm it is a great tote. That's membership.citycast.fm/CityCastDC. Thanks so much. We deeply appreciate y'all.
Okay, the highest profile criminal incident in the district this year was surely the gunman at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. who, according to reports in the Post this week, may not actually have even fired his gun, but nonetheless, very appropriately and understandably, put an enormous scare into a lot of people. There's been a lot of takes on this, most of them kind of predictable. The right wing says there's a bunch of left-wing assassins out there, et cetera, et cetera. Trump says this is why we need a ballroom, because it'll keep him safe from the menaces that lurk in public hotels. But there was a piece in the Free Press, that's Barry Weiss's publication, that had maybe the most incredible take yet. And it was a writer who'd been at the dinner, and she said what she took away from the night was dudes rock. She'd been surrounded by these men who knew just what to do, who were chivalrous, who were protecting, who were calm, who, as she put it, had a weirdly specific knowledge of Secret Service protocols for moments like this. I wasn't at the dinner. Emma, I know you weren't either. Martin, I suspect you were not. Emma and I were both out that night. Did you read that piece?
I read that piece in disbelief, and it's actually written by Barry Weiss's sister. But yeah, I read that piece and I immediately sent it. Maybe it worked because I immediately sent it in a group chat and was like, guys, you just got to read this. I can't adequately summarize the absurdity of this take in that, it was a great night for dudes that call cars vehicles and talk about the Roman Empire. I just was kind of in disbelief that was what we were going with, 24 hours in the wake of an attempted presidential assassination.
Based on any evidence that you saw that night, were men behaving in a manner that was more notably calm or knowledgeable about vehicular implications than women?
That was not my observation. I did go to the Washington Hilton Hotel. I was able to get inside the security perimeter for a press conference, after they'd already secured everything. And I mean, there was a massive security presence of Secret Service and MPD and people wearing the HCMA jackets from the city and tons of very qualified seeming people. I felt very safe. I did not notice random men spouting off facts about their West Point experience, but I did feel like people had the situation under control. I felt protected, but I was more focused on asking the chief of police and the mayor questions about the implications on public safety. I wasn't really noting the way that quote unquote our biology kicked in. As
can I just say that Emma was supposed to be out going to parties that night, and she hears what's happened, and is a good reporter and an old police reporter. So she calls sources, gets brought into this press conference. In the conversation we have just had with me and Martin, Emma has, I don't know what HCMA stands for, but she's spotted a jacket. She's used an acronym. She's described procedural protocols and recounted how she remained focused on doing her job of asking questions of the mayor and police chief. It sounds to me like you are really a masculine beau ideal, Emma.
Oh, thank you. That's not really what I'm aiming for.
But she did. There was no gladiator references. I want come on, we got to talk in real violent imagery here. Come on.
Who was your favorite Roman emperor?
I'm going to plead the fifth here. I can't say.
I guess the idea is we're supposed to recommend you all read it, but I don't know. It's fun, I guess it's human nature in a moment of crisis or something, historic happens, to try to reach for significance of it. Here's what it says about the culture or whatever. And one of the happy things about living in Washington is that happens a lot here, which sometimes leads to brilliance and often leads to conversations like this where we mock someone and then secretly wonder whether they were actually trolling us all along.
I know. I've actually enjoyed some of the firsthand accounts that I've read, or maybe enjoy is the wrong word, but people have had really, I think, powerful accounts, or I've seen a lot of journalists talking about how, has this become part of the American consciousness of what you do in these, why has it become instinctual for Americans to understand how to respond to these things? I'm not ragging on the firsthand takeaway reflection piece, but I think that some are really poignant and others miss the mark. Martin, did you have any favorites or least favorites?
No, but there was again, you have a room full of reporters and a big incident happens. You're obviously going to have 1,001 people jumping on their phones. They're going to live tweet it. They're going to put it on Instagram. my favorite one, and I think this actually came from a Free Press reporter, when commotion started, everybody hit the floor, apparently. That's what the reporting was. Everybody kind of hit the floor, and then there was chaos and all sorts of things. And most reporters, their instinct is to hold up their camera, their phone, to see what is going on in this massive ballroom. Can they catch something? This one particular reporter had it on selfie mode, and she goes under the table, and it's just showing her under the table talking about the chaos going on around her. And my initial reaction to that was I think you're getting this wrong. You're not the story. The story is around you, so we should be focusing on the story. On the Free Press thing, on that story, I did a big eye roll to that one only because I'm look, law enforcement, generally speaking, has been dude heavy. Let's admit it. It's mostly men that have been in it. So yeah, you're going to see a large proportion of men doing these quote unquote manly things. I mean, that being said, we've all met totally badass female law enforcement types. I mean, after covering January 6th, I remember one of the MPD officers who was injured that day, this woman, Christina Laurie, she told me her story, and I was like, you're one of the biggest badasses I know, because she's roughly my height, but probably 50 pounds lighter. And she was getting pelted with all sorts of stuff, but she still did her job. And I didn't write a story about specifically how this was the cry of liberation for women police officers doing their jobs. I mean, it's just, I feel like these people do their jobs. They get into that line of work because they believe in it, in theory, and they're going to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done.
I think the other lesson is, there's certain words that only cops use, or cops use way more than regular people
Individual.
do. If I'm ever around the Free Press offices, I'm going to talk about vehicles. There was 2 youths there. There was a male. And I think I will impress everybody and maybe be invited in for lunch.
Maybe you'll get a glowing review.
Who knows? Before we jump on to next, I want to give a big thank you to our newest CityCast DC neighbors. There's a lot of them this week because it is our spring membership drive. So thank you very much to Laura Lee C., Courtney W., Rachel C., Marie D., Laura C., Aaron M., Sarah P., Patty S., Michelle L., Vanessa B., Elizabeth Q., Callista A., Carlos A., Kelly B., Alicia A., Ebony L., Teal B., Mary Elizabeth M., Regina C., Greg S., Amy P., and Teresita S., who I am reliably informed is my mom. Thank you, Mom.
Hi, Michael's
and thanks
mom.
everyone else, too.
Michael's mom, only now? Come on now.
I know. What's she been doing? So ordinarily right now is when I would be saying hey, we've got a members only 4th segment that only members, like all of these good people, will get to listen to. Today we're making it free for everybody just to give you a sense of what you would get by signing up to CityCast. So please do so. You will be helping our work. We're building out a reporting team right now. As we get that going, there's going to be a lot of stuff, scoops, exclusives, excellent content that you will only get if you're a member. And I hope you will join that, both because it's the right thing to do and a nice thing to do, and because you'll get some pretty excellent stuff out of it. It's only $10 a month or $100 for a full year. You can join by heading to membership.citycast.fm. You also get ad-free listening, exclusive members events, and a super secret events-only newsletter. Again, that's membership.citycast.fm. Okay, now that it's just us friends and visitors today, Martin, you noted this week that DC may get a second Costco if Congress has anything to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be perfectly honest, this is not going to happen. But this was this wild idea that got floated after this redistricting referendum in Virginia, which went in the Democrats' direction. Republicans got really mad about it, and they said, "Listen, because we lost, we want to get rid of the bluest parts of the state. We want to give up Arlington and Alexandria, give them back to the district where they originally started." Because history nerds would know that the district was 10 miles squared, and that included parts of Maryland and parts of Virginia. Now, the wildest thing about it is that this has been floating kind of in the subconscious part of the debate over statehood and home rule for the longest time, mostly as a joke. But now pretty prominent Republicans are talking about it. I mean, the guy who's the head of the Heritage Foundation was on social media saying that this is the thing we have to do. We have to play hardball with leftists, and the best way to do it is to pack all those Democrats in Arlington County and Alexandria, shove them into Democratic DC, and that's going to turn the rest of Virginia, ruby red for forevermore.
And it's also going to deprive them of a vote in Congress and members of the Senate and home rule and all kinds of other things that most Americans expect.
Right. But we're going to get Clarendon. We're going to get Columbia Pike. We're going to get the second Costco. We'll get another Cheesecake Factory. I mean, they're still there now. There's no law against interstate Costco shopping. Fair enough, but I don't go over there. We'd get HQ2. Like if Ted Leonsis wanted to move the capitals again, he wouldn't have to move to Virginia. He'd just be moving to the part of DC that is now across the river. So
I think more Jeff Bezos is actually like a negative against that right now.
It's fair. But anyhow, I just reported on it because I was curious about the politics of it, but then also trying to work through the actual consequences. Because I found out that Arlington represents 6% of the Commonwealth's GDP. And Virginia would literally be giving up 6% of its GDP because they're pissed about a referendum. I mean, like, you do you, I suppose.
I know this is a long shot, and maybe this is a silly question, but do you think there's any world in which Democrats and Republicans would strike a bargain in which we would make DC square again, but then DC would get a vote, statehood?
Emma, you incredibly astute question from an incredibly astute reporter. The Free Press should write a story about you, honestly.
She kept focused. In the Roman Empire, they once consolidated Rome with some of its suburbs.
So I found out in doing some research that about a decade ago, the DC Republican Party actually floated this idea of some sort of like grand bargain where Arlington and Alexandria come back to DC. DC becomes a square, the next state, square-shaped, and gets 2 Democratic senators. And because Virginia has like shoveled off its most Democratic jurisdiction parts, they would get 2 Republican senators that would balance off DC. So there would be no change in the balance of the Senate, and then DC would get statehood. So I was really fascinated that, again, this is kind of like both folks on the left and the right have kind of endorsed this at different times for different reasons.
In the world of monkeying around with DC's maps, there actually is, in the Maryland legislature this year, there was a measure introduced. It's not gotten out of committee that would fund a study of retrocession of the rest of D.C. to the state of Maryland. That is to say, just as Arlington and Alexandria rejoined Virginia in the 1840s, almost all of the current District of Columbia could rejoin Maryland, leaving like a rump District of Columbia that would basically just be like the mall, Capitol, the White House. And then the District of Columbia voters would, take part in the election for Senate in Maryland and would be in a city within Maryland the same way Baltimore is. Congress would lose the right to dictate whether there should be no turn on red cameras in the district, or at least in all parts of the district except the mall. They wouldn't do much for your 15th Street bike lane, Martin, because that would still cross the rump District of Columbia. But the point is, what an irony it would be if Arlington and Alexandria were given to D.C. only to have the rest of D.C. join Maryland, leaving the District of Columbia as Arlington, Alexandria, and the mall.
Like, the last thing anybody needs is more Maryland drivers. So, we don't need to add 700,000 people to Maryland for the purposes of getting that many more Maryland drivers. The funniest part about the GOP, this kind of Republican endorsement of retroceding Arlington and Alexandria back to the district, is their fundamental argument is that it was against the law for those parts to go back to Virginia. They said the Constitution said that DC has to be 10 miles squared. You can't change the boundaries. If that's the case, then this argument for retroceding DC, part of DC to Maryland falls apart. Because if you can't change the boundaries, we're kind of stuck where we are. So anyhow, again, like I said at the beginning, this is not going to happen. It's totally fun to play with maps. I mean, there was another map going around yesterday that some Democratic consultant was like, what DC should do after the voting rights decision in the Supreme Court, DC should just take each of its wards and make each of them an independent state, and Democrats should accept those independent states into the union as new Democratic additions of the Senate. Which, again, now we're playing with hypotheticals that are kind of ridiculous, but let's do it.
The real question is, do you think we'll be seeing any Make DC Square Again hats around the district?
I do not think so. I think you might see some in red parts of Virginia where people feel like they're being hosed, as they are, with a 10-to-1. The Virginia congressional delegation could be more blue than the DC Council by the end of this.
I give the Republicans credit for that catchphrase. The Make DC Squared Again is really good because what was floating around on social media for years was recreate the diamond, which is not nearly as good, even though technically because of the alignment of DC, it is a diamond, not a square. But I think Make DC Squared Again also plays on multiple levels. It works.
MAGA, Maha, they've got a template. It's working for them, and they're sticking with it.
Well, you could put your opposing hats on that would say, just keep DC cool. We don't want to be squares. Martin, awesome to see you, man.
Thank you very much for having me.
Emma, great to see you again. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Yes.
And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our production team this week was Annie Reese, Julia Karen, Ash Durbin, PJ Shahamat, Laura Tsutsui, and Lizzie Goldsmith. Kayla Cote-Stemmerman and me, Michael Schaefer, wrote our fabulous newsletter, CityCast DC, this week. I hope you'll subscribe. And our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer. Again, music is by Alex Roldan, with additional music from DM, Philip Ayers, Blue Lou, from Triple Scoop Music via Getty Images. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell friends to rank us on their June ballot? You can always write us in. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.